Hello guys, and welcome to another video, and this one is basically going to be a bit of a first impressions for the first day of ExileCon, specifically the keynote section, the 90-minute keynote at the start of ExileCon day 1. And I've had a bit of time to think about this. I've actually slept on it and thought about all the stuff that we got told there in that little keynote section and kind of processed my thoughts on it, because there's a lot of big revelations and things that are going on that I think a lot of people didn't expect. And really, the whole keynote was totally unexpected for me. Loads of things that I didn't expect, and there were a lot of things missing that I did expect. And so this is going to be a bit of a first impressions video. And I don't mean this video to be overly negative, but I do want to be honest. And so that's what this video is going to be about. It's probably going to be a bit of a ramble, and I'm just going to be talking. It's not scripted. And I'll just go through my thoughts for each part of the keynote section. So we started off with a bit of a flashback into Path of Exile's history, which was quite fun to look at, especially considering that I'm not really a super veteran player of this game. I started in 3.10, so a lot of the stuff before that, I kind of don't really know the details of it. So it's interesting to look back at the trailers and see how far the game has come in that time. And so that was nice. And then we had Chris come onto the stage with his catchphrase. And of course, that was great. Got a bit of reaction from the audience. And Chris basically said that they had been working on this stuff for ages, which is of course true, the stuff that they're going to show off. And then he introduced Jonathan and Mark onto the stage and introduced them as the lead devs for Path of Exile 2, which immediately did start to ring a few bells, I think, for me. And Jonathan came onto the stage and he done the talking. And he basically said that Path of Exile 2 has grown so much in scope, and the game has become a huge thing, a hugely different thing from Path of Exile, to the point where they have made the decision to make Path of Exile 2 a separate game, completely separate from Path of Exile 1. It will now be two separate games. You have Path of Exile 1 if you want to play that, or Path of Exile 2. And the idea for them going forward is that they'll support both games with their own expansion releases, their own balance, their own features. And both of these games are apparently going to be supported with a cadence, a league cadence that kind of like separates them, so you're able to play both games if you want to. That's the plan anyway. And we'll get to more of that in a little bit, but let's first talk about Path of Exile 2, because this was the main showcase. The large part of the showcase was the Path of Exile 2 showcase. And how this worked is we had Jonathan on the stage, and Mark was actually playing the game live. And I really do respect this from GGG. I don't think many other game developers would have this, where you get on stage and you play your own game live in front of the audience. It's not a pre-rendered thing. It's not a, you know, they haven't got anything being cut out of it. This is exactly what's happening on stage. And actually, something did go wrong. You know, they were fighting a boss and Mark died, so he had to actually start all the way from the beginning of the boss fight again. So the entire convention was kind of waiting on him to kill this boss, which he did get there in the end. And honestly, Path of Exile 2 looks phenomenal. Like, the game looks incredible. The graphics are insane. The animations are crisp and precise. They kind of interweave with each other really well. You have like lots of different animations for different skills, and these mechanics kind of blend in seamlessly together, and it looks great. And I think I wouldn't really expect anything less from Path of Exile 2. From what we've seen of the little teasers, we thought the game was going to look great, and it is absolutely going to look great. And there's a lot of big new things in Path of Exile 2. We're going to have a gigantic new passive skill tree with over 1,500 new nodes. And it's going to be a different passive skill tree, of course, from Path of Exile 1, because, as I said, these are two different games now. And each class is going to have two classes on each starting location. And it seems like the Scion is gone, as we've heard that there's going to be 36 ascendancies. So they've done away with the Scion, which I don't think is too much of a big deal, but obviously they've gone in a bit of a different direction there. And I think the decision to make two classes and then have them specialize into 3 ascendancies each is a little bit weird. I'm not sure why they didn't just go with the 5 classes with 3 ascendancies each to begin with, and then maybe add ascendancies as the game progresses. It's going to be really interesting to see how well they can differentiate these ascendancies between each other, because 36 is a lot. I mean, a lot of people were questioning initially whether the addition of 19 new ascendancy classes to Path of Exile that already had 19 was going to be too much, and whether they could really differentiate those classes. Well, in Path of Exile 2, they are beginning the game with 36 ascendancies right off the bat. And it's going to be very interesting to see exactly how they go about achieving that and making each ascendancy feel special and unique. I'm not sure how they're going to do that, but I'll have to wait and see, I guess. And the new skill system looks great as well. There's like these combo features, and a lot of skills seem to have systems where, like, you know, one hit is a bit weaker and then another hit's a bit weaker, and you get like a third hit which is powerful and maybe more impactful. It might freeze enemies or things like that. And then you have other skills which play off of that combination. So once you actually have the freeze, you can use another ability to take advantage of the freeze and deal more damage. And that kind of combination use of skills is really, really interesting, I think. But is it really like current Path of Exile? I would say it's very, very different. And perhaps this is part of the reason why Path of Exile 2 has become a different game, is that it is just so vastly different. Will you need to make use of this kind of combo feature system in the end game? Who knows? We don't really know anything about the end game, which is the most interesting thing, I think. And also quite a disappointing thing. You know, I said I would be honest. I'm quite disappointed that we haven't seen any endgame of Path of Exile 2. It's been 4 years since it was announced, and we still don't really know anything about the endgame. We heard from Jonathan that the game is going to be massive, and that the leagues are largely being reworked. And by leagues, I assume he means things that are in the endgame that you can then interact with, like we have right now, the core leagues that are actually part of the endgame. But we don't really understand exactly how they're going to work, and we don't really have any idea of exactly how the end game is going to work in Path of Exile 2. Since it's a new game, they may be going in a completely different direction with it, now that it's kind of untied from PoE to an extent. So that is quite interesting. I think the fact that we have no idea of the end game just yet is a little bit concerning, and honestly, it's a little bit weird as well. I really thought they would want to show the end game off at this ExileCon. Even if it was just some like short pre-rendered footage where they've actually played out a map and they've like cut the bad bits or whatever, just so they can show an endgame build progressing map. But, well, we didn't get that. And we got to have a look at the new weapon system, which is really, really interesting. So how they're doing this is, it looks like weapons will grant a skill which is free to use. I'm not sure if every skill will be free to use from weapons, but at least the two they showed off in this demo were free. One was a normal fireball skill. This was free. I don't know if it works like you socket all of the support gems in there and it's still completely free. I'm not sure how exactly that's going to work. But the other one was like some kind of power-up skill where you slam your staff on the ground and then the next ability you use is used 2 extra times. So it's almost a bit like Unleash. But it's also free to use, but that one actually had a cooldown. And then, of course, we've got the reveal that there's a dodge in Path of Exile 2. A free-to-use dodge with no cooldown at all, and that is a big revelation because that is hugely impactful in terms of gameplay. That really is going to differentiate Path of Exile from Path of Exile 2, and I think that that's going to be such a giant change to the way how you actually play the game. In general, I would say Path of Exile 2 does look like it's a bit slower, but the combat looks more fluid, and I do wonder, as I said, I'm really, really interested in the end game. Just how is endgame going to play exactly? Are you still going to be using one skill in the endgame? Are you going to have to combo skills off together? You know, it's really hard to say at the moment if this game is going to appeal to the same player base that are interested in Path of Exile right now. That's very, very interesting. But the campaign itself looks amazing. The level design and the bosses, the bosses look so good. Like, they just look absolutely phenomenal. The one boss in the demo that just comes off of the wall of the tomb, just kind of like climbs off the wall. Really, really creepy looking, and it's just really, really cool. I love that. The bosses look amazing. And we had the level finish. There was actually a bit of co-op play going on the stage with Octavian and Mark. And then they finished the demo with the reveal of the beta, which is in June 2024. Way, way later than I expected in any kind of imaginative sense. I did not expect it to be that late. And that's the closed beta, by the way. So we're probably going to see closed beta in June. Open beta might not be until 2 or 3 months after that. I mean, realistically, I think Path of Exile's launch date is probably going to be, at the very earliest, the end of 2024. More likely in 2025, I think. And that's a big revelation in its own right that the game is still so far away. So that means that we're left with Path of Exile 1, at least for the time being, and that was where we actually got Chris Wilson back onto the stage, and he's now talking about Path of Exile 1. And this is also where we kind of found out that Jonathan and Mark are the lead game developers going forward for Path of Exile 2. They probably have been for a long time in the background. And Chris Wilson is now the lead developer for Path of Exile 1. And, you know, I've got to kind of ask this question. I mean, we'll never find this out for real, but is there a bit of a divide internally in GGG? Was there a kind of discussion that happened internally as to whether Path of Exile 2 was just far too different from the original vision of Path of Exile? At some point, was there a discussion that happened between perhaps Chris Wilson and Jonathan? You know, perhaps this discussion was, can we realistically actually put Path of Exile 2 in the game and overwrite Path of Exile 1 just like that? Are we going to cause too much friction there? Are we going to lose too many players? Is this going to kind of alienate the player base that we've built up over so many years? Is there a divide there where Chris Wilson kind of believes in the original game in Path of Exile 1 and developing that, and perhaps Jonathan and Mark and maybe some others see the game differently and they're developing Path of Exile 2? And I think the idea of both of these games being developed in tandem and them supporting them at the same time with league releases is really, really bizarre to me. The idea that one player would play both games over the course of a league, so they play one league and then a month later the new league comes out for Path of Exile 2 and they play that. Well, I think this is a little bit of wishful thinking, I've got to say that, because I'm not sure if the same player will play both games at the same time. I know that some people will, but I think the large majority of people will definitely favour one game. And you've got to remember as well that these games are going to be so drastically different by the time Path of Exile 2 actually launches. They're even drastically different right now from what we've seen of Path of Exile 2. They've got their own balance. Core game mechanics like things like stun and freeze work entirely different in the two games. You got the whole weapon swap system and weapon skills. There's just a crazy amount of things that are different between the games. And the players that would want to play both games have to kind of have this encyclopedia of knowledge in their head for each game to know exactly which game they're playing at any given time and know how the mechanics work in that game and how to make a good character build and all of these different things. And honestly, I'm just questioning how exactly that's going to work in the future. As a fan of Path of Exile, I'm a bit concerned for the original game, and I'm a bit concerned for Path of Exile 2, because I'm kind of thinking, well, by releasing Path of Exile 2 as a separate game, are they kind of potentially risking the success of Path of Exile 2? Because one of the things about Path of Exile is that the content creators, the people that make build guides, have a huge influence on the game and what is played in any given league and the meta. And, well, what if a bunch of those guys, or maybe even all of those guys, you know, the really big ones that kind of make all the builds every single league, well, what happens when Path of Exile 2 comes out and they stick with Path of Exile 1 because that's the game that they love, that's the game that they've supported for so many years, and they like it for a reason, and eventually they maybe don't even play Path of Exile 2, and they carry on making build guides for Path of Exile 1. It's going to be a really interesting situation, I think, and obviously Path of Exile 2 is going to have its own dedicated player base. That's kind of how I see it happening, really. I think there'll be a dedicated player base for Path of Exile 1, a dedicated player base for Path of Exile 2, but I think the problem is with one company developing both games in tandem. I mean, at some point they're going to look at the metrics. You know, Path of Exile 1 has 25,000 concurrent players and Path of Exile 2 has, 300,000 concurrent players. Is it really feasible to carry on working on Path of Exile 1? Will they end up dropping the support for that game entirely? Or perhaps they'll just make it so that they've got basically a skeleton crew of workers. Or maybe I've got that wrong entirely, and maybe Path of Exile 1 will carry on being the mainly played game, even with all of its clunky systems and things that people do not get along with. There is a reason why people play that game even up till now. There's a reason that we love Path of Exile due to all of its really interesting interactions and mechanics and all of the crazy things that you can do. And, well, is Path of Exile 2 going to introduce that same kind of thing? Or is it going to be a little bit more generic? Are the systems a little bit more appealing to the masses? And I'm not really sure. It's going to be very interesting. For me, Path of Exile 2 is going to be a wait and see. There's not really much else to say about that. But as for Path of Exile 1, Chris Wilson was on the stage. He announced the brand new league, the Trial of the Ancestors. There's no Atlas expansion in this league, which really, really is surprising to me. The Atlas expansion slot was in Crucible. It didn't come. There's no Atlas expansion here either. No Zana either, interestingly. And so the Trial of Ancestors does look super fun, though. The league mechanic looks great. It's like a little auto-battler. The roguelite of Sanctum worked in Path of Exile, so why not an auto-battler? It looks great. And that looks like it's going to be a really fun league mechanic, something really refreshing and different. And there's like this new tattoo mechanic that's coming in as part of the league mechanic rewards. And it's like a system where you can replace the passive skills on the tree, particularly small passive skills, with interesting stats like movement speed or reservation efficiency or extra damage or resistance. And I think we're going to see some absolutely crazy builds this league. Really, really min-maxed, crazy builds. And we also had the news that Sanctum is coming back with itemized Sanctums, a little bit like the Alva Temples. But this really interestingly, you'll be able to run the entire floor, and at the end of the floor, you actually gain a new item, which is another itemized floor. But it would include all of your resolve, all of your boons and debuffs, and you'll have all of the things that are going on, and then you can actually trade that item if you wanted to. And Chris actually gave the example of, here's a Mirror of Kalandra, but you only have one resolve left, so you can kind of sell that off to someone who might be able to do it. So Sanctum being back is a lot of fun. I think that's a great addition to the Path of Exile endgame. And there's a gigantic amount of new Atlas passive tree keystones, and they look amazing, honestly. These ones are really, really great. We've got the Expedition one, which gives you a giant bomb that you can just place and blow up all of the remnants in its radius. That looks really, really fun. There's the one that allows you to modify Vow side areas because they're no longer corrupted. So you can actually craft them. And one of the drops was like an ultimatum aspect. That's the pieces of the ultimatum map that you have to place together a little bit like a Harbinger item to actually make the map. And if they actually drop, obviously they'll be weighted based on the different encounters. But if it's possible to get ultimatum aspects from there, it probably means you'll be able to get the ultimatum aspect that actually originally comes from the Delve boss, which is really annoying to get. And that's a great addition, especially for SSF. That's great. And some of the other ones look amazing as well. So those Atlas tree keystones look like they're going to have a huge impact. And those are a great addition. I mean, I think right now, Path of Exile's endgame has never been better. It's so, so good right now. Like, being able to just play whatever you want and spec into whatever you want and play that mechanic is just fantastic. And then we've got a bunch of new support gems that are coming to the game. 14, actually. One of them is returning projectiles, which I can only assume is replacing Vengeance Cascade. And there's like a really weird one which makes your war cries do like area corrupted blood around them or something like that. That looks crazy. Very, very bizarre. And then there's also one which makes mines in front of you, and then when you explode them, the mines will shoot a projectile attack skill based on a wand or bow attack towards the position where you are facing right now. So just like fire a bunch of projectiles. Those actually look really crazy. And I'm really, really interested to see all of the new Atlas Keystones and the new support gems in the weeks coming up. And of course the patch notes, which I kind of hope there's going to be a bit more skill balance and things like that in there. But they didn't say anything in the trailer, so I'm a little bit concerned that there's still no real meaningful skill balance, which is a little bit sad. But surprisingly, there was only 2 Ascendancy reworks. If you watched my predictions video, you would know that I said 6 or more Ascendancy reworks. Chris Wilson actually said in Crucible that they meant to do half of the Ascendancies, which would have meant 8 in the Crucible reveal, and they actually didn't do that. They ended up only doing 2, and then in this one, they've just done another 2, so I guess they're taking that a little bit slower. And, well, with the revelation of Path of Exile 1 and 2 being 2 different games, they're no longer trying to match the Ascendancies up like I thought they were doing. And so, well, these Ascendancy reworks are just based on the fact that they wanted to rework these Ascendancies and give them a bit of a lick of paint, I think. And so I haven't actually kind of looked fully into these Ascendancies just yet, but from what I've seen so far, the Chieftain has a few very powerful nodes. There's one that converts damage types into fire damage based around your gem socketed into the tree. And there's another one that also applies your maximum fire resistance to your lightning and cold resistance as well, which is absolutely bonkers. That one's crazy. And some of the other nodes look a little bit weird. There's one that makes enemies have 0 fire resistance while you're stationary against damage over time. Very, very bizarre, that one. I don't think you really ever want to be standing still in Path of Exile. You just kind of die, but that's a little bit weird. And there's like a totem one which taunts enemies and recoups life based on damage that your totems take. And the Guardian has a few interesting things as well. The block node in particular looks quite powerful. If you're casting spells, that's just 25 spell block. And if you're a spellcaster with shield charge, well, you're probably going to have both of those blocks up all the time. 25 attack block, 25 spell block, that's really good. And there's also one that heals 100% of your life over 1 second every 4 seconds. So if you're using Comb Spirit with those, that's going to be a lot of rage. And there's some like link skills, and there's also some minions tied to that Ascendancy now. So some Ascendancy specific minions. I wonder what they'll be like. And overall, I know this video was a little bit of a rant, sort of talking about different things, and I didn't want it to be too negative. I'm just a little bit unsure at the moment. I'm in a bit of a weird mindset with the whole reveal, and just to be clear, I'm very excited for the next league. I'm excited for the future of Path of Exile. But I'm in the camp of wait and see for Path of Exile 2 and the idea of supporting both games. I'm really not sure how they're going to go about this in the future. So that's really it. That's my initial impressions from Path of Exile's reveals at ExileCon. What do you guys think about these reveals? Let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, stay tuned and stay safe.